In the early months of 1940, the war seemed far away from the frozen north. Norway and Denmark stood neutral, proud of their independence and untouched by the chaos consuming Europe. Their ports traded quietly, their citizens read of distant battles, and their governments clung to the fragile idea that neutrality was protection. But in Berlin, plans were already unfolding that would shatter that illusion forever. To Hitler, Scandinavia was not a distant frontier. It was the key to survival. Through the port of Narvik in northern Norway flowed the lifeblood of the German war machine, Swedish iron ore. If Britain cut that supply, Germany would be starved of steel and crippled before its empire could expand. The icy fjords, the harbors of Oslo and Bergen, the airfields near Trondheim, all became pieces on a deadly chessboard. In London, Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, saw the same map and drew the same conclusion. The Allies planned to mine Norway's coastal waters to block the iron route, a move that would provoke Germany into war in the north. Both sides prepared to strike. Both believed the other would move first. In truth, the Germans were already moving. Under the code name Operation Weserübung, Hitler ordered the simultaneous conquest of Denmark and Norway. It would be the first joint air-sea-land operation in history, a lightning strike across two nations designed to secure the North before the Allies could react. The campaign was born not of greed, but of fear. Fear of encirclement, fear of losing the war before it truly began. The stage was set. The Arctic would soon burn. To understand why the war came to the north, one must follow the iron. Every winter the Baltic froze, sealing Sweden's ports. Only Narvik, ice-free even in February, could ship the precious ore that fed the furnaces of Germany's Ruhr Valley. From there came the tanks, the guns, the aircraft, the machinery of conquest. Without it, Blitzkrieg would grind to a halt. British intelligence knew this. So did the German High Command. Both sides viewed the Scandinavian supply route as a dagger aimed at their hearts. In secret meetings, Churchill urged mining Norwegian waters to block the shipments, but Norway's government protested. It would violate neutrality. Caution prevailed, and the mines were delayed. That hesitation would cost lives. In Berlin, Admiral Erich Raeder convinced Hitler that waiting was suicide. If Britain moved first, Germany's economy would collapse. Raeder proposed something unprecedented: seize Norway and Denmark in one swift, coordinated assault. It would guarantee access to the North Atlantic, protect the Iron Route, and give Germany naval bases to threaten Britain itself. Hitler hesitated only briefly. "The occupation of Norway," he said, "is a matter of life or death for the Reich." Plans were drawn overnight. The code name chosen, Weserübung, exercise Weser. It would be no exercise at all. Operation Weserübung was a gamble of scale never attempted before. 10 naval groups, hundreds of ships, and thousands of men would move as one, striking from the Skagerrak to the Arctic Circle. Denmark would be taken in hours, Norway in days. It was Blitzkrieg, adapted to sea and snow. At the heart of the plan stood precision. German destroyers would carry troops disguised as merchant convoys, slipping into Norwegian ports under cover of darkness. Simultaneously, the Luftwaffe would bomb airfields and fortresses, paralyzing defense before it began. Paratroopers, a new weapon of modern war, would descend from the clouds to seize key positions and airfields. Each strike would be coordinated by radio, down to the minute. The plan relied on deception and speed. Failure at any port could unravel the entire operation. Admiral Raeder himself warned, If the Norwegians resist with strength, we are lost. But the High Command believed surprise would be absolute. Norway, they thought, was sleeping. Denmark would surrender before breakfast. Every calculation depended on arrogance and on luck. In the early hours of April 8th, German fleets departed from Kiel, Wilhelmshaven, and Bremen. The North Sea swallowed them whole. To the casual observer, they were freighters heading for trade, but in their holds waited soldiers, tanks, and destiny. At dawn on April 9th, 1940, the German army crossed Denmark's border. It was the shortest campaign of the war, a conquest measured in hours. Columns of tanks rolled through Jutland. Paratroopers seized airfields near Aalborg and Copenhagen before most Danes had finished breakfast. Within minutes, the royal palace was surrounded. King Christian X, facing an ultimatum, refused to sacrifice his people in a hopeless fight. "The duty of the king," he said quietly, "is not to rule over the dead." At 6 a.m., Denmark surrendered. The entire nation had fallen without a single major battle. The occupation began with chilling efficiency. Danish soldiers were disarmed but not imprisoned. The government continued under German supervision. Hitler called it a model protectorate. For the Germans, Denmark was not an enemy but a corridor, a bridge to Norway. Airfields buzzed with aircraft preparing for the next phase, while convoys of troops rolled north toward the waiting fjords. Yet beneath the calm obedience, resentment festered. The Danes endured, but they did not forget. Their quiet defiance, saving Jews, hiding fugitives, sabotaging rail lines, would later make their small nation a giant of conscience. But that morning, as German troops marched through Copenhagen, the world watched in silence. The North was falling. While Denmark fell in hours, Norway awoke to fire. In the early hours of April 9th, German warships slipped into Norwegian waters. The cruiser Blücher, leading the fleet toward Oslo, met its fate in the narrow Drøbak Sound. Norwegian coastal guns thundered, striking the ship with direct hits. Flames engulfed it. Hundreds of soldiers drowned in the freezing fjord. For a moment, the world believed Norway might resist, but the Germans were relentless. Paratroopers seized airports near Oslo and Stavanger. Luftwaffe bombers turned fortresses to rubble. Communication lines were severed. The government fled north. King Haakon VII refused to surrender, declaring his loyalty to the people and vowing to fight on. By nightfall, Oslo had fallen. Bergen, Trondheim, and Narvik soon followed. Hitler's Arctic Blitz had succeeded, but not without cost. The seas ran red with burning oil and sinking ships. For the first time in the war, Germany had tested its new warfare on a continental scale, and won. The world took note. The age of neutrality was over. The age of total war had begun. As the sun rose over a burning Oslo, the fate of Norway seemed sealed. German troops occupied the capital, Luftwaffe bombers dominated the skies, and the radio now broadcast German propaganda. Yet far to the north, in Hamar, the spirit of the nation remained unbroken. King Haakon VII and his government refused to submit. The Germans sent emissaries demanding that he appoint Vidkun Quisling, the Nazi collaborator, as prime minister. Haakon's reply was defiance itself. "I will not yield to force." That moment transformed him from monarch to symbol, a father figure for a wounded country. While bombs fell, the king broadcast a message to his people. "I will never sign away Norway's freedom." Those words echoed through the valleys and fjords like a vow carved in ice. German paratroopers pursued the royal convoy relentlessly. bombing the small town of Nybergsund where the king had taken refuge. The blast shattered the windows of his shelter, but Hakon survived and continued his journey north. Through snow and chaos, he reached Tromsø, where the government in exile was formed. From there, Norway's leaders coordinated resistance, refusing to surrender. Hakon's refusal would outlive the war itself. His endurance became the moral heartbeat of occupied Norway, proof that even when armies fall, nations endure through courage and integrity. Far to the Arctic north, Narvik became the crucible of Norway's resistance and Germany's ambition. The icy port, surrounded by mountains and fjords, was the lifeline of Hitler's war industry, the exit for Sweden's iron ore. Its capture was essential to the Reich, and its defense became a symbol of hope for the Allies. On April 9th, German destroyers sailed into Narvik under the cover of a snowstorm. The Norwegian defenders fought with desperation, but were outnumbered and outgunned. Within hours, the port was seized. Yet the victory was costly. The Royal Navy had already mobilized. Within days, British destroyers stormed into the fjord, unleashing chaos. The narrow waters became a cauldron of explosions and fire. In 2 brutal naval battles, nearly all of Germany's 10 destroyers were sunk. The fjord was filled with burning oil and the screams of the dying. On land, Norwegian, British, French, and Polish troops advanced through the frozen wilderness to retake the town. The fighting was savage: bayonets, grenades, avalanches triggered by artillery fire. By late May, Narvik fell to the Allies, the first German-held city ever liberated, but triumph turned hollow. The news from France was catastrophic. Hitler's forces had broken through the Ardennes. Orders came from London: evacuate Norway. The men who had fought and bled for Narvik watched helplessly as the ships carried them away, leaving their victory behind. Within days, Germany reoccupied the ruins. The North was lost once more. In the shadow of defeat, betrayal found its voice. On the day the Germans marched into Oslo, a familiar voice broke through the static of the radio. Vidkun Quisling, once a defense minister, now a traitor. "The government has ceased to function," he declared. "I have taken power in the name of order." His words froze the nation. He had crowned himself Norway's new ruler, under Hitler's blessing. The Germans accepted him instantly. To them, Quisling was useful, a Norwegian face for their occupation. His new regime, headquartered in Oslo's ministries, became an instrument of control. Newspapers printed Nazi propaganda. Jewish citizens were registered. Resistance was outlawed. The Gestapo set up headquarters in Oslo, and the first arrests began before the ink on his decrees had dried. But the Norwegian people rejected him utterly. To them, Quisling became a curse, a word synonymous with betrayal. Underground leaflets mocked him, calling him the Reich's servant. Even German officers privately ridiculed his arrogance. In a cruel irony, the man who sought to rule Norway had made himself its most hated figure. As the months passed, his power eroded, replaced by direct German military rule. Yet his collaboration stained the country's conscience, a wound that would only begin to heal after his execution in 1945. Occupation did not mean surrender. Across Norway, the spirit of defiance burned quietly beneath the surface. Farmers, teachers, fishermen, all became soldiers of silence. The movement that began with whispers grew into an underground army. Milorg, the secret resistance network. In barns and cellars, radios hidden under floorboards broadcast news from the BBC. Leaflets printed on smuggled paper told the truth the occupiers tried to bury. Teachers refused to teach Nazi propaganda, risking arrest. Students gathered secretly to study banned subjects, history, freedom, and hope. Armed resistance soon followed. Saboteurs cut telephone lines, blew up railways, and destroyed German supply depots. In the mountains near Rjukan, Norwegian commandos trained by the British executed one of the most daring missions of the war: the attack on the Vemork heavy water plant, which crippled Germany's nuclear program. It was a victory not of armies, but of will. The Gestapo answered with terror. Entire villages were burned, families executed, thousands sent to concentration camps. Yet every act of brutality only strengthened Norway's resolve. The occupiers controlled the streets, but never the soul of the nation. As 1941 turned to 1942, Norway lay frozen in the grip of the Reich. German fortresses dotted the coast, airfields stretched across once empty valleys, and U-boats prowled the icy waters. Hitler called Norway his northern shield, a base from which to threaten the Arctic convoys supplying the Soviet Union. Tens of thousands of Norwegians were forced into labor, building bunkers and tunnels for the Atlantic Wall. Food shortages grew severe, rationing became life itself. Families bartered potatoes for bread, coal for hope. The winter seemed endless, yet in that darkness, light persisted. Secret networks carried intelligence to Britain, guiding Allied bombers to their targets. Norwegian sailors risked their lives in the Arctic convoys, braving storms and torpedoes to deliver supplies to Murmansk. Their courage became legend, the silent bridge between two fronts. For many, the war was no longer about victory, but survival. But even survival was resistance. The people of Norway endured not just for themselves, but for a promise that one day the flag would fly again over a free Oslo. By 1944, the tide of war had turned. The Allies were advancing in France, the Soviets were pushing from the east, and Germany's once mighty empire was collapsing from within. Yet in Norway, the shadow of occupation remained, long, cold, and unbroken. German troops fortified every fjord, every port, preparing for an invasion they knew would come. In London, Norwegian exiles planned for that day. King Haakon broadcast messages through the BBC. Hold fast. The dawn will come. Those words carried through static and snow, keeping the spirit of resistance alive. British commandos and Norwegian agents launched raids along the coast, lightning strikes against radar stations, fuel depots, and U-boat bases. Each success was a spark in the long Arctic night. By autumn, the Red Army had entered northern Norway through Finnmark. The Germans retreated, leaving scorched earth behind them. Towns like Kirkenes and Hammerfest burned to ashes. Civilians fled into the frozen wilderness. But the people endured, just as their king had commanded. The Allies' return was not a single battle, but a slow awakening. Step by step, the chains of occupation broke. And in the silence that followed, the first sound of freedom was the wind, sweeping through valleys where German banners once flew. May 8, 1945, the war in Europe was over. Across Norway, bells rang, guns fell silent, and tears replaced fear. German forces, nearly 400,000 strong, surrendered without a fight. After 5 years of oppression, the nightmare ended in a single morning. From London, King Haakon VII returned home. His ship, HMS Norfolk, entered Oslo Fjord under escort, where thousands waited along the shore despite the cold rain. When the king stepped ashore, the crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with sobs. Old men saluted, Children waved flags they had hidden through the war, and women held photographs of the sons who would never come home. For a nation that had endured silence, the sound of its own freedom was overwhelming. Across the country, German flags were torn down and burned. The Gestapo prisons were opened. Survivors emerged pale and hollow, blinking in the sunlight. Resistance fighters came out from hiding, no longer shadows, but heroes. Norway was whole again, but forever changed. The liberation was not victory alone. It was resurrection. The cold, the hunger, the fear, all had been endured for this moment. And for the first time in years, the North was at peace. With freedom came justice. The collaborators who had served the Reich now faced the judgment of their own people. Among them stood the man whose name had become a curse, Vidkun Quisling. Captured in Oslo, he faced trial for treason, murder, and aiding the enemy. The courtroom was silent as he tried to justify his betrayal. "I did what I thought best for Norway." The judge's reply was final. "You thought only of yourself." Quisling was executed by firing squad on October 24th, 1945, in the very fortress where his victims had once been imprisoned. His death marked more than retribution. It was the closing of a wound that had bled for 5 years. Other collaborators were sentenced, their crimes exposed in daylight. Yet Norway, unlike many nations, refused to let vengeance consume it. The trials were not driven by rage, but by principle. The goal was not revenge, but restoration, to prove that justice, not hate, would rebuild what tyranny had tried to destroy. For the survivors of occupation, the reckoning was bittersweet. No sentence could bring back the dead or erase the scars, but it restored something deeper: faith in the moral strength of a small nation that had refused to bow. Operation Weserübung was a military success for Germany, but a strategic failure that revealed the flaws of the Reich. The conquest of Norway and Denmark secured vital ports and resources, yet it overextended German power and tied down hundreds of thousands of troops for the rest of the war. Hitler had gained territory but lost time, fuel, and men, luxuries he could never replace. For the Allies, the campaign was a brutal lesson. It exposed their indecision, their complacency, and their failure to act before it was too late. But it also forged the foundation of modern warfare, the realization that air, sea, and land must strike as one. From the ruins of Narvik and Trondheim came the doctrines that would shape D-Day and every invasion thereafter. And for Scandinavia, Weserübung was transformation. Denmark and Norway emerged scarred but united, nations that had seen the price of peace bought too cheaply. In the post-war world, their neutrality was tempered by vigilance. They would never again trust distance to protect them from history. The war had redrawn their maps, but it had also redrawn their souls. When the guns fell silent and the snow began to melt, the North returned to quiet. But it was no longer the same. The ruins of bunkers still lined the coasts, ghostly reminders of the war that had frozen the world. In the valleys and villages, memorials rose to the fallen, stone crosses among birch trees, marked with words simple and eternal: "For our freedom." The invasion of 1940 had begun as a struggle for iron and territory. It ended as a testament to endurance. Norway's people, caught between giants, had proven that courage was not measured in victories, but in resistance. Denmark, though conquered in hours, had preserved its humanity, saving almost all of its Jewish population from the Holocaust. Their quiet heroism stood as one of the few lights in Europe's darkest night. Today, the story of Operation Weserübung remains more than history. It is a warning and a reminder that neutrality is fragile, that freedom demands vigilance, and that even in the face of overwhelming force, the human spirit can defy empires. In the silence of the fjords, where once cannons roared, the echoes of that defiance still remain.